Hello everyone, this is Princey Saraf from Dr. Hari Singh Gaur University, Sagar. This is the zoology presentation on the topic pathogens and how they cause disease and body defense. This presentation is submitted to Dr. Dipali Jatt ma'am. So first the question is, what is pathogen? Pathogen is a microorganism that can cause harm to your body. A pathogen is an organism that causes disease. Your body is naturally full of microbes. However, these microbes only cause a problem if your immune system is weakened or if they manage to enter a normal, sterile part of your body. A disease is caused when a pathogen enters our body and breeds there. So there are many types of pathogens. Few of them are listed below with their properties. So there are many types of pathogen. For example, viruses, bacteria, protozoa and fungi. Influenza, common cold and poliomyelitis are the different diseases which are caused by virus. Chlorella, syphilis, whooping cough, tuberculosis, and tetanus are the different diseases which are caused by bacteria. Malaria and amoebic dysentery are caused by protozoa, and athlete foot is a disease which is caused by fungi. Pathogens are different and cause disease upon entering the body. All a pathogen needs to thrive and survive as a host. Once the pathogen sets itself up in a host body, it manages to avoid the body immune system and uses the body resource to replicate before exiting and spreading to a new host. So, first of all, we will talk about bacteria. So pathogen can be transmitted a few ways depending on the type. They can be spread through skin contact, bodily fluids, airborne particles, contact with feces, and touching a surface touched by an infected person. So in this slide, I will talk about bacteria. So we all know that bacteria is a single-celled organism that usually reproduce by splitting in two to create a pair of identical cells. Bacteria are the most abundant living things on earth. They are helpful and harmful bacteria. Helpful bacteria produce vitamins. They help to digest nutrients. They keep harmful bacteria in check by competing for food and resources. They secrete substances toxic to pathogenic bacteria. Bacteria are microorganisms made of a single cell. They are very diverse, have a variety of shapes and features, and have the ability to live in just about an environment, including in or our body. Not all the bacteria cause infections. Those that can are called pathogenic bacteria. So antibiotics are used to treat bacterial infections. Some strains of bacteria have become resistant to antibiotics, making them difficult to treat. This can happen naturally but also happen because of the overuse of antibiotics according to the World Health Organization. So the disease associated with bacteria are pneumonia, in which the inflammation of the lungs takes place. The symptoms of pneumonia are fever, chills, shortness of breath, cough, leading to infections, cause of death worldwide. Vaccination are recommended for adults 65 and older. So in this slide there are some bacterial diseases like meningitis, meningitis, infection of the membranes covering the brain and spinal cord. The symptoms of this disease is fever, headache, stiff neck, confusion, usually mild and goes away on its own. Vaccination are recommended for child 11 to 18-year old. Another disease caused by bacteria is strep throat. So the symptoms are red and sore throat with white patches on the tonsils. Symptoms are swollen lymph nodes, fever, headache, and the second disease is tuberculosis. In this chronic bacterial infection that usually affects the lungs. The symptoms are coughing, fatigue, night sweats, weight loss. 10 to billion 10 to 15 billion Americans have been infected and carry this disease. Another is ulcers. 25 million Americans suffers by the disease ulcers. The symptoms are pain in abdomen, nausea, loss of appetite. So the next pathogen is virus. Virus is a very small infectious agent composed of nucleic acid surrounded by protein coat, and it lacks an independent metabolism and reproduces only within a host cell. Inside the host cell, it sheds its protein covering and its genetic material takes control of the cell and create more viruses. So viruses are made up of a piece of genetic code such as DNA or RNA and protected by coating of protein. Once you are infected, viruses invade host cell within your body. They then use the components of the host cell to replicate, producing more viruses. After the replication cycle is complete, these new viruses are released from the host cell. This usually damages or destroys the infected cell. Some viruses can remain dominant for a time before multiplying again. When this happens, a person appears to have recovered from the viral infection but get sick again. So, the common diseases associated with viruses are common cold. So, common cold is a disease. Um, every person is suffered from common cold, and it lasts from 1 to 2 weeks. Almost always transmitted by hand-to-hand contact. Reduce risk by washing hand frequently and avoid touching face. Avoid multi-symptom cold remedies. Nowadays, coronavirus is another virus which is very COVID-19 affects different peoples in different ways. Most infected people will develop mild to moderate illness and recover without hospitalization. The most common symptoms are fever, dry cough, and tiredness. So, the almost all always transmitted by hand to hand contacts and reduce risk by washing hand frequently and avoid touching face. Avoid multi-symptom cold remedies. So the influenza is the another disease caused by virus infection of the respiratory tract, and influenza is also commonly called as flu. The symptoms are fever and extreme fatigue. Recovery is within 1 to 2 weeks but can develop pneumonia. Highest rates occur in children. So the children are very prone to this disease influenza. Another disease is herpes virus, a family of viruses responsible for cold sores, mononucleosis, chickenpox, and herpes. Once infected, the host is never free of the virus. Virus lies latent within cells and become active periodically. Two herpes virus can cause severe infections in people with suppressed immune system which infect the lungs, brain, colon and eyes. So fungi and protozoa are the pathogen which also cause different types of disease. So what is fungus? Fungus is an organism that absorb food from organic matter, usually restricted to the skin, mucous membrane and lungs. So the athlete, foot, jock, itch and ringworm are common disease that can be caused by fungus and can be deadly in people with an impaired immune system. So there are millions of different fungal species on earth. Just 300 or so are known to cause sickness. Fungi can be found just about everywhere in the environment, including indoors, outdoors, and on human skin, and they cause infection when they overgrown. Fungi cell contain a nucleus and other components protected by a membrane and a thick cell wall. Their structure can make them harder to kill. Some new strains of fungal infections are proving to be especially dangerous, such as Candida aureus, and have prompted more research into fungal infections. So the next pathogen is protozoa. It is a microscopic single-celled organism that often produces recurrent cyclical attacks of disease. Malaria is a major killer worldwide, mostly among infants and children. Giardiasis is a parasite that lives in the intestine of humans, and the symptoms are nausea, diarrhea, bloating, abdominal cramp. Parasitic worms and prions. So, what are parasitic worms? A pathogen that cause intestinal and other infections. The example include tapeworm, hookworm, pinworm. Tapeworms can grow many feet. Pinworms are most common in United States and originate from contaminated food or drink. What are prions? Prions responsible for degenerative disorders of the central nervous system. So it lacks DNA or RNA and consists of only proteins. It is a sponge-like holes in the brain. Symptoms are loss of coordination, weakness, dementia, and death. Examples include mad cow disease. So in this slide, I will talk about how pathogens enters the body. Pathogens enter the human body in two ways, either by the direct means or indirect means. So what is direct contact? Direct contact means that the disease causing microbe is passed from one person to another when their bodies touch in some way. Indirect contact means indirect contact happens when microorganisms are carried to a person in some way instead of by actual body to body contact. Indirect transmission takes place in three ways: through respiratory passage, food and water, and through vector. Indirect transmission. So indirect transmission is by many ways: by vector and by food transmission and water transmission. So pathogen can enter indirectly in our body by many ways. Vector transmission involves an animal such as an insect. For example, malaria is transmitted by a female Anopheles mosquito, and dysentery by houseflies and plagues by fleas. Food transmission. Eating raw or undercooked food or drinking water contaminated by sewage means you take large number of microorganisms straight into your gut. That is salmonella. Water transmission contaminated by sewage means you take large number of microorganisms straight into your gut, that is chlorella and amoebic dysentery, anywhere without proper sewage treatment and disposal is at risk of these disease. Transmissible disease is a disease in which the pathogen can be passed from one host to another. So let us talk about body defense. Body defense means how our body can protect ourselves from these different types of pathogens. The body has several defenses against pathogens so we do not fall ill with the disease they cause. So the skin is the outer covering of the body that covers our whole body, and it protects from physical damage, microbe infection and dehydration. It is dry. Dead outer cells are difficult for microbes to penetrate, and the sebaceous gland produce oil which check the microbes to enter in our body. Body defenses also include blood clotting. If the microorganisms get into the body through a cut in the skin, the most important thing to do is to close the wound quickly so that no more organisms can enter. A scab does just that. The body contains tiny structures called platelets and a protein called fibrin. A scab is basically platelet stuck in a fibrin mesh. The second is mucous membranes. The respiratory system is protected in several ways. Nasal hair keeps out dust and larger microorganisms. Sticky mucus trap just dust and microbes, which are then carried away by cilia, tiny hairs on the cell that line the respiratory system. The most important body defense system include stomach acid. So we all know that hydrochloric acid in the stomach kills harmful microorganisms that might be in the food or drink. So in this diagram we can see that there are many body defense which are shown in this figure: lysozyme in tears and other secretions. Stomach have the acid HCl with the pH 2, so we can understand that how acidic it is. Removal of particles by cilia and nasopharynx. Mucous lining trachea. Skin surface physical barrier, fatty acid normal flora, and in the starting of the small intestine at the duodenum portion, pH change rapidly. So this all includes the body defense system. So let me talk about food hygiene. Keep your own bacteria and viruses away from the food. Always wash your hand before touching or eating food or putting your hands into your mouth for any reason. Keep animals away from the food. For example, if we leave our food uncovered and allow housefly to settle on them, then they bring with them bacteria. As they continue feeding, they split their saliva on the food and contaminate it. Do not keep food at room temperature for a long time or the bacteria start breeding in it. Keep raw meat from the food as it contains bacteria. So let me talk about immunity. how immunity develops for the different kinds of pathogen that we have studied. So during the body first encounter with a pathogen, there will be a few lymphocytes with specific receptors. It takes time to divide to form clones, B lymphocyte to secrete antibodies, T lymphocyte production. So if the same pathogen invades again, persisting memory cells can give a faster, more effective response. So this is the most important graph which is showing primary response and secondary response. So in this graph, secondary response happens more quickly and produce many more antibodies. So in this graph we can see that the secondary response is this is the graph shows its peak, and this is called the active immunity. First, when the first exposure to antigen and the second exposure to antigen shows the active immunity. Natural immunity, active and passive. An infection is an example of acquiring natural immunity. It is called active as your body needs to work to produce the necessary antibodies. When a mother breastfeeds her baby, she passes antibodies to it. This is a way of acquiring passive immunity, as it is a way of gaining antibodies without the immune system having to produce them. The thick yellowish milk colostrum that is produced for the first few days after birth is particularly rich in antibodies. So doctor recommended mothers to breastfeed her baby for the for protecting the baby from different types of pathogen entering the baby's body and cause disease. Artificial immunity, active and passive. An alternative to natural immunity developing is to give vaccination. Artificial immunity antigen is injected into the body. This may be in the form of an inactivated bacterial toxin or attenuated, not harmful virus, which would promote active immunity, or the injection of antibodies or antitoxins, which would promote passive immunity, that is Clostridium tetani. Passive immunity doesn't last as long as active immunity, once only weeks or months. No lymphocytes are stimulated to clone themselves. No memory cells have been made. This type of immunity can only last as long as the antibodies, toxins last in the blood. So let me talk about antibodies. This is the diagram of antibody. It have two chains. It have four chains. Two are heavy chains, two are light chains. So in this diagram, upper side is for antigen binding site, and antigen binding site with variable region is specific, and in between have disulfide bonds between different chains of the antibody, also known as immunoglobulins, shortened to Ig, such as IgA and IgE. Different immunoglobulins respond to antigen in different ways. Thank you so much.